Who wants to live forever? Hey folks, let's talk about some LGBTQ plus representation, and specifically, I want to kind of tackle something initially starting in the form of a question that I see asked, usually mockingly, when I talk about things like the bury your queers trope, which I've dedicated an entire video to, and also dealt with specifically in regards to Star Trek more recently. And in that one, I got very upset and literally yelled at creators, writers, showrunners, what have you. And if you're not going to put in the time, just stop! Now, one of the questions that would get asked, again, often in a kind of mocking tone, or at least that's what I tended to feel like was coming off of it. It's text. You can't always get tone. Let's try and give the benefit of the doubt. Is this idea of, well, does that mean that you need a shield? Do queer characters need to be invincible? Immortal? They can never die? So, to pull a quote from The Simpsons, the short answer is yes with an if. Long answer is no with a but. Because, as is always the case with these things, it's context dependent. I always get so frustrated when anybody, be it a video creator, somebody on Twitter, or somebody in my comments, basically trying to boil something down to an either or is like, oh, so it's always this? I'm like, no, nothing is always. However, there are some things that really should become the way that it happens more often than not, at least for the time being, until some things get sorted out. Without reiterating all the stuff I've already talked about with the inception and the persistence and the issues with bury your queers as a trope, full video there if you need it, I will say this. Whether or not the killing of a queer character in any given piece of media, and obviously I'm talking fictional media here, that impact and really kind of how badly that's going to read will be decided by a couple of factors, such as how close is their death to the point at which it is revealed that they are in fact queer, supernatural, or how immediate from their introduction is it established that they are dead or we are forced to witness that they die. Star Trek Discovery. But there's another element that's kind of what I want to focus on here, and that is the idea of tokenism, which is something I actually haven't tackled in specific on this channel before. Now, tokenism as a practice is a bad thing. Now, here's the thing to remember. Tokenism is not simply the presence of minority people in a story, a company, an organization, what have you. Generally, when tokenism is talked about as, say, in a workplace, what it refers to is the practice of hiring an incredibly small number of diversity hires. I hate using the term, but that is the reality of it, so that it does not appear as if there is a hiring bias at that company, where the company has no actual interest and doesn't care about actually ensuring a diversity of its work populace or a diversity of thought. It just knows it's self-aware enough to know the optics are really bad if everybody in the company is exactly the same. So I'm not trying to pick on them, but if the whole company is white cis males, if you have at least a woman, a person of color, a out queer person in there, then even though only one does not meaningfully make them a presence in the organization, it does give a shield for that organization, that employer to go, oh, but look, and that one, see? It's the appearance of diversity, but it is always only aiming for the absolute basic rudimentary appearance of it. Now, as I said, the term kind of originated more from employee and hiring practices. Now, when talking about it in terms of entertainment and media, tokenism is a thing. And when it happens, it is often damaging for the groups being represented. Now, I say that as someone who has said in the past, and I stand by this, I would rather have problematic representation than no representation, because at least problematic representation is a starting point. You have something that you can work on. If you're not there at all, then you might as well not exist as far as things are concerned. Now, I say that, and yes, you could probably show me examples where I would go, no, just don't put us there. It will have to do with specifics of the depictions. Again, nothing is ever always. Remember that. So I kind of talked about the issues of tokenism in an employment environment. It is a veneer of diversity where none exists. But there's an additional layer that gets involved when you are talking about a media depiction of a minority group, any minority group. And that is if it is a token character, which is not always the case for single instance representation. Not every instance of only one member of a minority group appearing among the cast is tokenism. But pretty much all instances of tokenism have only the one. So, like, correlation, not causation. When you only have the one instance, that character is carrying a lot more weight in terms of the impression that they're giving to the audience, be they members of that minority, in which case you have a single character and people who are actually share commonalities with that character have to look at that and go, that is my representative in this piece of fiction to everyone else who isn't me. And if you aren't a member of that minority, you are seeing that one character, and for this story, in the course of this movie, this TV show, this book, what have you, they are your only representative for that. And what that means implicitly, sometimes explicitly, but almost always implicitly at the very least, it implies that this is what all members of that minority are like. Again, there are ways to dampen this in terms of how well-rounded that character is. Not leaning on stereotypes and cliches is going to go a long way towards helping you avoid that issue if you've only got the one representation. But that's kind of why my answer to should queer characters be immortal is a soft yes, is this exact reason. I've noted before, I did a video on mortality rates for queer characters in film. It's not just that we get killed in a lot of movies, TV shows, books, comics, etc. It's that when we do, we as a queer audience often have to watch the queer character die. Our sole representative of our life experience is who we have to watch die. Oh, crap. Or, oftentimes, even when that isn't the case, and there's more than one, usually they're a couple, and we have to watch one half of a couple die, so we're still looking at a 50% mortality rate, with the remaining 50% now in mourning. And it feels like an attack when you watch it often enough. And I'm even going to extend an olive branch to a kind of viewer who probably has not watched this far into the video, if we're being completely honest, but I'm going to try it anyway. You folks who have been complaining about Doctor Who, the last few series, you know who you are. The ones who have been commenting in my comments, other people's comments, possibly even making videos about how every single straight white male who appears in the Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker era of Doctor Who is shown to be an idiot or a villain. There are no competent, righteous, good, straight white male characters on Doctor Who. I know you complain about, and I'm not even going to run the numbers to find out how true that is, because honestly, how true it is in reality is irrelevant to what I'm about to say. If you have ever felt that way at any point, even if you don't feel that way now, if you ever felt that way, then you got a taste of what it feels like to have every instance of representation that you see that looks like you feel negative, either because they are depicted as villainous or as stereotypes, or because they are getting killed every time you see them. And again, it probably isn't actually every time. It probably isn't every single straight cis white male character on Doctor Who is incompetent and or evil. It probably isn't every single queer character that I see in movies and TV and whatnot who ends up dying, or I have to see the pain of seeing their partner die or what have you. But it's often enough that it certainly feels like it's every time. And that's the problem with token representation. And again, that is not to say that you can't have a single representative of a minority, but you need to realize the weight of doing that. Whatever you do to that character, you are metaphorically doing to that entire population. If the implication is that queer people are disposable because they're treated that way and they are killed off, again, I will cite, for me, the most egregious example in something that is a show that I actually watch was in the Doctor Who New Year's special Resolution, not this most recent one, but the one before, where a character is established as gay and then immediately killed. When you do that, what you're saying is queer people are disposable. So should we have immortal gays? Yeah, for a while I would kind of like to see that. And not because I can't handle watching people like me be depicted as anything other than perfect angels who live through everything. I mean, that's shallow. I don't need that. And certainly it helps in any given depiction if they are not the sole or part of a couple, and then that couple is the sole queer representation in your medium. Because here's the thing. I had to dig at the Doctor Who example because I've actually seen people make that argument that all straight cis white men on Doctor Who are shown in a negative light. But the thing is, most of the time when a white cis het male character is shown in any form of media and is beaten up, the character's killed, or they're a despicable human being, that doesn't get an outcry. And the reason is that group doesn't have token representation. They have ample representation. You didn't like this one? Here's 10 more in the same movie. Don't worry about it. We don't have that. And that is why I, at this point, have drawn a hard line and said, just stop with burying your queers, with killing gay characters, with killing trans characters, with killing non-binary characters, whatever the case may be. Because so little care is happening with what is often token representation. If you're going to represent us, yes, I am going to ask, please handle with care. Not because of my tiny, fragile ego. My ego is pretty stable, and I've been watching this nonsense go on for almost 4 decades now. I can take it. But the point is, I shouldn't have to. And anyone who doesn't have my ego also shouldn't have to. So don't ever tell queer people complaining about how someone that we relate to or is meant to represent us dies, and you go, I don't complain when they kill a white man. Yeah, and you shouldn't. Because it's not equivocal. Because you are better represented, and your representation is not token. And the few times, I say you, and I'm talking collectively, bear with me and understand I'm not trying to lump everyone together, but those kinds of people who will say that, will say, I don't complain when a white male dies, like, yeah, but you do when you feel like there's bad representation for all the white men in something. You do complain. That's why we do. Because oftentimes it's just the one person. So it would actually help if those characters, if they are the sole representation, until such time as we get to that end goal that I've talked about, where representation is so normalized that nobody notices anymore, until we are there, yeah, handling with kid gloves would actually be a big improvement over how things have been for a long time. And if you feel that I'm trying to stifle writers' creativity, I'm not telling anybody what they can or can't write. I'm making a request. As an audience member, as a creative, as a writer, I'm asking you, please think really, really hard. I know how confident and precious we can get about our own work. If somebody tells you that this depiction feels harmful to them, I'm not saying you have to go by that person's word, maybe get a second or third opinion from somebody from that same group, but at the very least, listen. And just to kind of make the point finally, should we have more immortal queer characters? Well, off the top of my head, for an immortal queer character is Jack Harkness. And Jack Harkness is awesome. So yeah, more of that, please. Thank you very much for listening and for sticking all the way through. I have a Patreon if you want to support what I do. This is, in fact, how I earn my living. That is how I cover my bills and am able to eat and afford equipment and everything else that I need to make this a thing. Any amount you're able to give helps, but even if you can't, there are other things that you can do that help. I have merch, links down in the description. Liking, sharing, subscribing, costs you nothing, also helps me out. And whatever your thoughts are on what I've talked about, politely drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. But you also don't have to do any of it. Like I say, I make recommendations, I'm offering guidance. I'm not definitively telling anybody what to do, because at the end of the day, you are the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.